The BTK Killer Capture. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. The small Kansas town of Park City stood frozen under the bright morning sun when the FBI stormed into the quiet suburban neighborhood on February 25, 2005. Officers surrounded a beige house on Independence Street, their rifles raised, hearts pounding. The man they were about to arrest was not a fugitive hiding in the shadows. He was the local compliance officer, a church president, and a father of two. His name, Dennis Rader. Inside, Rader sat calmly in his vehicle, about to drive off for lunch, when agents blocked his path. "Mr. Rader, you're under arrest," one of them said firmly. The man blinked behind his glasses and asked, in a low, steady voice, "Why?" The officer replied, "Because you're BTK." That name, BTK, which stood for bind, torture, kill, had haunted Wichita, Kansas, for over 30 years. Rader's calm face gave away nothing, but the silence that followed was heavy. As officers handcuffed him, neighbors peeked from behind curtains in disbelief. How could the man who led Boy Scout meetings, attended Sunday services, and lectured on city rules be the same monster who had terrorized their community for decades? At the police station, Rader sat under bright blue lights in an interrogation room. On the table before him lay a stack of old photographs, crime scenes that had once been thought to belong to a ghost. The lead detective leaned forward and said, "We finally have you." Rader looked at the pictures and smiled faintly. "You got me," he whispered. And then, just as the room fell silent, he began to talk. But how did the police get here? For years, BTK had mocked them, sending letters, drawings, and clues that led nowhere. Then, after disappearing for more than 2 decades, he suddenly started writing again in 2004, craving attention. His arrogance would be his downfall. It began when BTK sent a floppy disk to a local news station. In his message, he asked police if digital files could be traced. They replied in a newspaper ad, pretending to answer his question honestly. No, they can't. Believing them, he mailed the disk. What he didn't know was that every disk carries hidden data. When investigators examined it, they found a single line of digital evidence, a deleted Microsoft Word file that contained the name of a church and a user, Dennis. It was enough to reopen the hunt that had gone cold for decades. Soon, detectives were watching Dennis Rader's every move. They secretly obtained a DNA sample from his daughter's medical records, and when it matched the evidence from old BTK crime scenes, the truth was undeniable. That night, as police prepared for the arrest, one question filled the air. What would a man like Dennis Rader say once caught? And then, inside that small interrogation room, he opened his mouth and began to describe. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling light. Dennis Rader sat back in his chair, hands folded neatly on the table. The detectives waited, unsure what to expect. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, disturbingly calm. "Well," he began, "I guess we'll start at the beginning." He talked as if he were giving a lecture, not confessing to murder. His tone was steady, almost polite, as he described his first attack in 1974, the Otero family. He explained how he had chosen them, planned his entry, and carried out his plan. The detectives listened in disbelief as Rader recited details that only the killer could know. Every word he spoke confirmed what they had suspected all along. BTK wasn't a monster in the dark. He was a man who hid in plain sight. Outside the interrogation room, FBI agents and local police gathered behind the glass, watching every second unfold. Some of them had chased BTK for decades. Some had grown up in Wichita during the years when families locked their doors and slept with lights on. For them, hearing his confession was like watching a nightmare come alive. As the hours passed, Rader revealed one horrifying truth after another. He described how he would watch his victims for weeks, learning their habits, studying their homes. He used words like projects and targets, not people, not names. "I had my own little world," he said. A secret life that nobody knew about. When detectives asked him why he started killing, Rader paused. "It was something inside me," he said quietly. "I couldn't stop it once it started." BTK had to live. The most unsettling part wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. There was no emotion, no regret. He even corrected detectives on small details, making sure the record was exact. He seemed proud, almost pleased, that after 30 years, the world finally knew who BTK really was. At one point, the lead investigator leaned forward and asked, "Why now? Why start sending letters again after all this time?" Rader smiled faintly. "I missed the attention," he admitted. "I wanted to remind everyone I was still out there." That answer chilled the entire room. His desire to be remembered, to be admired, was what had led him straight into the hands of the police. By the time his confession ended, Dennis Rader had calmly described 10 murders in shocking detail, dates, locations, and even how he staged the scenes. He showed no guilt, no tears. When they asked if he felt sorry for the families, he only shrugged. As detectives left the room, one of them muttered, "He's been living 2 lives, and he doesn't even see the difference." That night, news spread across Kansas like wildfire. BTK captured. The headlines read, "The man who had haunted Wichita for 3 decades was finally behind bars." But as reporters gathered outside the police station, the question hung in the cold night air. How could a husband, a church leader, and a father of 2 live among everyone, hiding the darkest secret of all? The next morning, police searched his home. And what they found inside the quiet suburban house would shock even the most experienced investigators. It was early morning when investigators entered Dennis Rader's home in Park City. The air was still, the house neatly kept, like any other family home in the neighborhood. A dog barked in the distance as police began their search, moving carefully from room to room. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Photographs of smiling family members lined the walls. Bible verses hung in wooden frames. A cross sat neatly on the mantel. But then, one officer opened a small, locked cabinet in the hallway. Inside were stacks of old envelopes, floppy disks, and notebooks, each one labeled in tidy handwriting. When they looked closer, they realized what they had found, a hidden archive of BTK's life. The notebooks detailed every crime Rader had ever committed. Dates, times, locations, even what the victims had been wearing. In one folder were drawings, disturbing sketches of people bound with ropes, positions that matched unsolved cases. Next to them were news clippings he had saved, tracking his own crimes like trophies. It was all there, the evidence that confirmed what he had confessed. Yet what shocked investigators most was how carefully everything had been organized. It looked less like the work of a madman and more like that of a man who took pride in his projects. Every page showed how methodical he had been. Every detail revealed how long he had been planning, hiding, pretending. Meanwhile, outside the home, the quiet suburban street filled with reporters. Neighbors stood in disbelief. "Dennis," one woman whispered. "He used to help me shovel snow." Another said, "He was in charge of my neighborhood watch. I can't believe it." As the evidence was carried out box by box, the truth about Dennis Rader spread across America. News stations replayed footage of his arrest. Former coworkers, church members, and even his own family struggled to understand how a man they loved had lived such a double life. In court, Rader stood before the judge in a gray suit and glasses, looking more like a businessman than a serial killer. When the judge asked if he was pleading guilty, he calmly said, "Yes, sir." Then, in chilling detail, he recounted every murder one by one, as if reading from a diary. The courtroom fell silent as he described his crimes without emotion, almost mechanically. Family members of victims wept quietly in the front row. Reporters scribbled every word. The prosecutor looked shaken but steady. When it was over, the judge gave his final ruling, 10 consecutive life sentences. As Rader was led away in handcuffs, he glanced back only once, not at his family, not at the victims' relatives, but at the cameras. The faintest smile crossed his face. Years later, the house where Dennis Rader lived still stands, quiet and unremarkable. But for Wichita, the memories remain, of fear, confusion, and finally, relief. The BTK case had lasted over 3 decades, But it had ended with one small mistake, a single digital file that led to a monster hiding behind a mask of normalcy. And though Dennis Rader now spends every day behind prison walls, his story serves as a haunting reminder. Sometimes, the most ordinary faces hide the darkest secrets.